All right, perfect. We're back.
We're back.
We're back. Guess who's back? Michael and Tommy are back.
The boys are back in town.
I was going for an M&M. You went.
Oh, I went Thin Lizzy.
Thin Lizard?
Thin Lizzy.
Thin Lizzy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here we are. We're back. We got a I think a really special treat for everybody today.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say it's. I learned a lot from this interview.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, me too. I thought it was really interesting, really informative.
I went into this talk, and we'll explain what it is in a minute, but I went in deciding not to take a side, which is very rare for me. Mm-hmm. I always pick something that I'm going to argue,
yeah,
and then no matter how convincing the other person is, I'm gonna unleash. And this one I chose to remain neutral, and yeah, it was very informative, and I was definitely swayed by the end of it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I kind of went in with a positive, or at least just based on like stuff I've read in the past couple of years. I sort of had a bias going into it, which was in favor of our guests' passions. Why don't we just say what we talked about?
So we talked today about psychedelic drugs.
Yes.
And their benefits, specifically in the mental health field,
right? And
how they can aid alongside of psychotherapy. They can have a very positive effect to treat things like post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, end-of-life anxiety, depression, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Aaron Feller, so a very, very intelligent guy.
Yeah.
He pursued the medical industry. He was going to go to medical school, had his whole life figured out, and then pulled out, realized that the healthcare system is not what it's supposed to be, and pursued his artistic passion of writing, and is using his writing to talk a lot about the medical field, amongst other things. Mm-hmm. This being a very popular topic for him.
Yeah. And what it's kind of like, a loaded subject to start to dive into, because there's a lot of preconceived notions about psychedelic drugs, and I think it is important to go into this discussion with an open mind and listen to what the results have been with recent studies, which I think is what you tried to do a little bit. And
I did. You have to go into an open mind when you hear this podcast, because when you hear things like MDMA, mm-hmm. which we talk about, everybody thinks MDMA, ecstasy, party.
Did someone get murdered in that? Someone get murdered in the club?
I don't know why I did the scream. But I feel like that's what everybody thinks of. 100%. They just have that going off their head when they think MDMA.
Yeah.
At least I certainly did.
Right.
And this was a very enlightening conversation.
Yeah. And the important thing is to kind of realize that is that this is all a lot of discussion is using these drugs in like a psychotherapy setting. Not to say that it's, there's not benefits to using it recreationally, but this is specifically because he was kind of geared towards the medical field, like what the science says about these test results in treating PTSD, treating end-of-life anxiety, and we touched a little bit on the neuroscience of what goes on with with the different connections that are made when these drugs are active in the brain. And I think another thing is that like if someone has never done psychedelic drugs before, you can like it's almost so like you have no clue what it would be like, that it's automatically scary because it's something foreign, and not only that, it's like dealing with your brain. and it's like scary to expose your brain to something as powerful as that. And so I think that's probably why the drugs were banned in the 60s, and why it's now such a slow process in like getting approval for these mental health studies now. And but that's why it's fun to talk about too, because then you can also discuss, like, you can also like show the other side of this, of where like there's positive benefits to it, and it's not like you're seeing flying dragons in the sky and like, you know, like just absolutely off your rocker. It's like lower doses of these beneficial things. And I think you and I both would agree that we're not doctors or in the psychology field, but it's, of course.
Maybe you agree. I'm a fucking doctor. So.
You got your doctorate in gender studies.
Yeah, I think when you hear some statistics during this talk too, I mean, Aaron throws out some pretty convincing stats.
Yeah.
I had to look them up. They check out from what I found too. This data that he was saying, the statistics that he was saying. So,
right.
I mean, it's hard to disagree with the benefits that Aaron talks about.
Right.
I will say too that we, towards the end, we start, we get into some very controversial areas, and you'll hear Mike ask me what I think. And I made a decision to not answer that question, because it would have opened up 2.5 more hours of conversation.
Essentially, we wanted to talk to Aaron because he had these psychedelic views, or this experience and background research in psychedelics, and then he also had written this article that talked about psychedelics, but like also like in a political way, and like how they're going to be used, and like not cutting off certain minorities from having access to it. I mean, I don't want to like caricature the article, but like, we'll post a link to it. But basically, the first hour was all of the psychedelics and so interesting, and then we you and me, I feel like we slammed on the brakes a little bit because we didn't want to get into this whole political battle and turn this conversation, which I think was really great, into something that like was completely it would have been two completely different conversations.
Exactly, and it was such a great conversation that it deserves its own episode.
Yeah.
But we did want to, just to correct you, Michael, we did want to argue with him, just not
right.
on this episode. So we will. Don't worry, we will be bringing Aaron back and have an entire conversation about our favorite subject of identity politics and the injustice of racial bias and whatnot.
Right. Well, what do you say? Should we get it going?
Duh. Cue the music. No, the actual thing. Play the track.
Oh, okay.
Duh.
What is right and wrong?
Duh.
What is good and bad?
I always refer to myself as a contrarian.
The search for common sense and the defense of free speech.
Duh.
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 All right, welcome back to the Duh podcast. We have a very special guest with us. Someone I've been trying to get on our show since we started. He is world-renowned, very famous. Mr. Aaron Feller, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. World renowned. You're really fluffing my feathers here. Yeah, thanks for having me. I remember you talking to me when you were starting the whole thing, and I have played around with a few podcast ideas and even recorded a couple, but they've never gone anywhere. So it's really cool to kind of see where you are on what, this is number 9, I'm guessing, unless you have some can.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, number 9 is right. We're very popular in Venezuela. So.
Yeah, I heard about that. I mean, hey, if you're talking about important things, you catch, the right person and get in the right place. That's exciting.
we just got to start our Spanish lessons. That's it.
Well, I can maybe teach you a few things.
Cool.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about this subject. We had Aaron and I have talked a little bit offline, and we really got into a lot of different topics. But this last one was a passion of yours, Aaron, and I think it's fascinating your background too, and how you're pursuing a medical career and what kind of led you to pivot courses. Can you talk to us a little about your background before we get going?
Yeah, I mean, well, right now I'm living in Brooklyn and struggling to feed myself and pay rent here. But I moved out as a kind of chasing the dream of working in publishing and writing my own work creatively and publishing on a more professional level. The most recent, I mean, I kind of haven't published too much, but the most recent thing I published was an article on Symposia. It's Symposia with a P at the beginning, and the topic of that was psychedelics and race. The title of the article is Whitewashing Psychedelics, and that was born out of this, I guess, interest of mine, which led into getting a press pass through Symposia and some other people to go to this conference called Horizons. So that's kind of where I'm at now, but my background was, I mean, I studied biochemistry alongside writing, and I worked in healthcare for 3 years, was applying to medical schools, came right up against the brink, and then withdrew my applications. Had a huge change of direction, and took a little while to get traction and get in a different direction. But yeah, I have some medical experience. I warn everyone I'm not a medical professional, because I'm guessing we're going to talk a little bit about psychedelics and therapy.
Yeah, that's I remember you telling me a little bit about it, but what was your main reason for not wanting to get into healthcare?
The main it's kind of hard. It's like a spider web of reasons, but it's I mean, we're seeing it now, this dismantling of kind of what was hoped to be a rejuvenation of effective, affordable healthcare. But it's just been this morass of, whether it's pharmaceutical companies and the way they clog up the system and cause unwanted side effects from kind of like this capitalistic model, to within hospitals and their payment measures, to insurance companies, and like living, breathing in healthcare world, working alongside doctors, and then going on to a management position where I worked with them on a business level and just seeing their characters change completely. I didn't want to dive into that field where.
Yeah, and then how long ago did you get into the psychedelics and the therapeutic effects they possibly have?
I mean, starting young, I had read a few different books: Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley, The Spirit Molecule, DMT, The Spirit Molecule by can't remember the name of that author. A few other books on the topic, as well as some kind of more spiritual texts, and with characters like Ram Dass, formerly Richard Alpert, and some of these of the 70s psychedelic movement, who were on this part of this movement, who believed LSD was this magical substance that could like transmute you into like some form of higher plane, whether it was just an internal psychological one or something more spiritual. So I guess like originally reading some of those kind of gave me the idea that there was some potential benefit, but really the idea of it being used alongside CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a lot of, I think all of the studies being done right now use CBT alongside a few sessions with a psychedelic. And that idea, for me, was pretty recently, or coming into knowledge of it, and just as kind of this movement resurfaced and these studies started being done. So in general population awareness of it, the whole concept just kind of re-arose really into the spotlight. Maybe, I think 3 years ago, there's a New York Times cover page article on MDMA. It's MDMA-assisted psychotherapy being used for PTSD. So like kind of as that wave was growing, I was seeing those articles and noticing that and kind of reading a little bit about it. But really it was this most recent push where I went to this conference. I started doing a bunch of research on my own for the article I wrote. And I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that article. But first, let's just talk a little about, like, for the listeners, psychedelics. We're talking, so it's MDMA, LSD, medical marijuana.
Yeah, that's what that was my question. Was MDMA considered to be a psychedelic?
It kind of rides this weird fence, this border between like party drug is what it's known as, and psychedelic. It's hard to say. I mean, it's like arguing semantics. Like, what is a psychedelic? I mean, the term psychedelic itself, and a lot of people, I mean, it's kind of like this, what we're defining these as has popped up a lot. 'Cause it's, you use the term drug, are you talking about like cocaine, meth, heroin, to pharmaceutical substances, to these psychedelic substances? So what's a drug at all? But
so for the purpose of everybody on the same page, like, when in this industry, when we're saying psychedelics, what does that include?
So classic psychedelics would be peyote, ayahuasca, LSD, psilocybin, which is the active chemical in magic mushrooms. I guess MDMA is included in that as well. And then a few others, salvia, marijuana, also kind of a fringe, but I think included in that umbrella.
Yeah.
So what's the basic idea behind, like, to simply define what psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy? How would you define that?
I'll use the model of the biggest, probably the one people are most aware of and is getting the most press. And that is MDMA for PTSD. And so it's essentially, let's say you're part of this trial, you have PTSD, and I think part of the trial you can't have taken a psychedelic before, or at least MDMA before, just to keep placebo effect reliable or more reliable. And you go through, I think it's 12 weeks of psychotherapy. And 3 of those weeks, spaced out equally throughout the sessions, are during that session. It's extended, it's much longer, depending on what the substance is. You may stay overnight. And so you're just administered, I think, 3 different occasions, at least for this specific study. So it's psychotherapy focused, using the psychedelic kind of as a catalyst in these certain sessions to propel you or boost you or make the work you're doing more effective.
So like the idea is to create like more with like long-standing positive emotions that...
Yeah, so I mean, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, and one other thing I was going to say, just to whoever's listening this, like, really quick, it might be helpful if you could give us a good idea of what MDMA or ecstasy does to a person, like what generally happens.
So like, yeah, physiological effects, you have increased body temperature, increased heart rate. You may have, I forget the term for it. I mean, like pupil dilation, these are like the physical effects on your body, but then you also have these opening of the heart, I guess, is what I would call them, like feelings of love, feelings of self-acceptance, acceptance of others, a reduced reaction to fear, more trusting.
So that's
about right.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I think I read from the stuff you sent us was because I know I am familiar with psychotherapy, this idea of revisiting old trauma. And to use the PTSD example, you have to revisit that and unsuppress it so you can deal with it, right? That a lot of people with PTSD have never dealt with the trauma, so you have to revisit it. And so the idea with MDMA, and correct me if I'm wrong, is with the reduced fear, you can go back there more comfortably and deal with some of this trauma. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. So that's kind of the method. It's been interesting. So as the therapy has evolved and they're doing more studies and they're opening more sites, I've spoken to a few of the therapists who are either training to do the study or have done this or in some realm. Excuse me. And they're finding out that as they're expanding and training new therapists who maybe aren't as experienced, because some of the original therapists have been doing this since prior to MDMA being outlawed, I believe, in 1980 or somewhere around there. So they were doing MDMA-assisted therapy previously, and it was originally, when it was first synthesized, used in marriage counseling. So some of these therapists were getting success rates of, I think, 70-something, high 70s% of essentially curing PTSD. I mean, it's hard to define what is someone's cured or not, but they have this spectrum. You take this, and based on your responses, you'll have a rating, like a number rating. And if you're under, let's say it's 50, I don't know the exact terms. Let's say it goes 0 to 150, and based on your answers, you get points. And if you're under 50, you no longer are classified as having PTSD. So there's 77% that I think at 8-month follow-up, no longer were classified as having PTSD. And then once they train new therapists into these new sites opening, because they're expanding this treatment model, it went down to 66%. So the therapy itself is actually hugely important. And it's also the people they're treating have treatment-resistant PTSD, which means they've tried, I think it has to be 3 or 4 different pharmaceutical drugs, SSRIs or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and is this population generally considered to be military? Just because I know that PTSD is usually associated with veterans. Did they say anything about that?
A lot of them are.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, a lot of them are. There's also refugees from war-torn regions of the world. We've done studies on, I think one woman did an interview who had witnessed the traumatic death of her husband and was suffering PTSD.
Yeah.
I mean, it is more focused on veterans, or just because I think the majority of the population who has PTSD have gone and fought in a war.
Right. Yeah, because I know...
Compared to, I mean, especially in the U.S.
Yeah. Because I know, like, the word PTSD is being thrown around a little bit in the psych community these days. Like, it could even be like, I had a emotionally abusive boyfriend for a year, and then, like, I have PTSD from that. So it's like, I'm trying to... I guess it's... When you're saying it's hard to understand who's cured of PTSD, I'm also trying to figure out, like, what the diagnosis basis is, too. But I don't...
Should we look it up? I mean, I don't know how much... Let's see. PTSD, DSM-5.
Yeah.
The technical...
But generally the subjects are just, like, people who have experienced... Or who just, like, experience a constant negative state of mind and state of emotions because of certain events.
Sort of. So it's a little more complicated than that. It includes, like, nightmares, flashbacks. Hypervigilance is kind of like a buzz term where you're constantly... Your body is constantly feeling the need to be extremely kind of like fight or flight at all times. You have adrenaline pumping through you.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, and then I know. So you mentioned that the MDMA PTSD study, and then the one that I've kind of heard just from multiple sources was that Johns Hopkins study on psilocybin. Did you come across that one?
Yeah, was that the end of life care?
I think so. Yeah.
End of life anxiety.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, they're using various studies and they're trying to expand them. It's just a big issue of funding because governments won't fund it.
Right.
So the FDA and a few other agencies have to approve the treatment methods, and then it has to be they have to have a specific safe on site to hold the substance.
Right.
So it's really controlled, and then there's no government agency providing money, where most of the R&D, even within the pharmaceutical companies, a lot of it comes from whether it's tax breaks or actual funding from the government. So,
okay.
With psilocybin, they've studied end-of-life anxiety. So let's say you have cancer. You're going to die in, whatever it is, 2 months. They've given, alongside the psychotherapy again, doses of, I think, psilocybin and LSD they've done it with, and found that after the therapy and the sessions with the psychedelic, that these people have much less anxiety surrounding their impending doom.
I mean, we all kind of are dying, right?
Right, yeah.
Something I wanted to get your opinion on is, like, just to like kind of zoom out for a second here. When I feel like in American culture, when the word psychedelic comes around, you're immediately transported in a time machine to like a 60s hippie. Like that's like what a lot of people have in their minds as like the narrative of psychedelics. And then you mentioned that like 3 years ago, it's kind of built back up in terms of like the public's like attention. Like people are starting to pay attention to these studies and starting to experiment. I don't know, like it just seems to me that people are starting to experiment like with it more again, and it wasn't and it was kind of like pushed down for a while. I don't have any basis for that, but what in your opinion, why do you think, besides the illegality of it, like why do you think it was so cracked down on, and why do you think now it's being reborn?
It's a lot to unpack. I mean, there's been a long history of propaganda and oppression and kind of like divisive government action, depending on who you talk to, what the reasons for criminality of these substances, when they were finding that there was huge positive benefits in psychiatric treatment. So, I mean, originally you have, like you talked about, you say, eat some magic mushrooms. People are in their heads going straight back to Woodstock or Jimi Hendrix or whoever it is. I mean, even the Beatles with LSD and joining the Hare Krishnas, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, recently, and I had a few conversations on this topic, but one of the reasons I really think, and all these articles in, front page of the New York Times a couple times now, and across multiple publications, big name, whatever, whoever it is that it's being medicalized. So it's really easy to, I wouldn't say easy, but it's hard to reject the idea of at least reducing the scheduling. So, like the companies, or I guess not even companies, the non-profit organizations are using this medicalized model in order to reduce scheduling. Because if you go to someone and say, hey, look, the 66% of people who go through this treatment no longer suffer from PTSD, can become productive members of society again, it's going to be really hard for that person to say no. It's not like these groups are pushing for like widespread mushrooms that are legal. They're going to be sold at every corner store or coffee shop.
Right.
Even Amsterdam, for a long period, it was legal there. And they ended that in, I think, 2008, 2009.
Oh, that's pretty recent.
Yeah. And the other side of it too is the phenomenon of microdosing, which is kind of like a big buzzword. I mean, I'm sure you've heard plenty of stories of, Silicon Valley, these tech guys kind of building this empire by microdosing, whether it was LSD or psilocybin, in order to facilitate more creativity and more ability to have focused attention on something that maybe I think it's something difficult to focus on, like coding or.
Right.
So I'm curious about there's 66% with success stories. What about the other 44%? Like, are they worse off than they were? Is there some bad effects that, very negative effects that, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I know you're talking. It's that there aren't. I mean, MAPS, who's funding the MDMA study for PTSD,
What does MAP stand for?
MAPS, they stand for the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Right now they're fundraising for phase 3 trials with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for treatment of PTSD. And just
for my own knowledge, phase 3 is, what does that mean in terms of like the journey that it's on to being approved?
Final phase. It's the last. It's phase 3 of human trials. So phase 1 was a small group. Phase 2 expands that group. Phase 3, they've refined their methods and opened up much more sites. And if they can prove efficacy and safety, then their hope is that it gets rescheduled, taken from Schedule 1, which means high risk of abuse and no potential benefits, down to phase 2, which I think is just there are treatment methods. So like cocaine is Schedule 2, while MDMA, LSD, psilocybin, marijuana are all Schedule 1, and that's because cocaine has to be So let's say you go to a dentist, you're allergic to Novocaine, they can't give you that or any of these other numbing agents. Their last resort is to rub some cocaine in your gums or inject it. I don't even know exactly how they do it, to numb your mouth. So it's Schedule 2 because there is a potential use for it.
Dude, dentists have access to crazy stuff.
I don't know. I think they all. I had all carrying cocaine around in their lab coats.
I did like laughing gas one time for like a really long cavity filling, and I went on like a psychedelic journey.
Yeah. Have you seen? What's the show? I was just thinking of. Transparent.
No.
No, there's a character in there who like goes to her dentist, does laughing gas, and like sees God. God's a woman, and she's actually like the dentist who is giving her the laughing gas.
So I'm still curious though, if when we say cocaine, I mean, isn't it possible someone tries this, or MDMA or whatever, like tries this treatment and then they're in that category that isn't successful and they just end up with a cocaine problem after all this, or just end up with being like, I really like taking MDMA. I'm just doing that once a month.
Well, it's so interesting. I don't know. It's like hard. I would say, like, in this setting, I don't know. I haven't gone through it. I'm not entirely sure. And, like, could that potentially happen? I mean, hard to say. But it seems to me that if they are having success with the treatment, then kind of like the brain association with MDMA causing I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to get this out. Or like if it didn't work for them, let's say they struggled, they took MDMA, it didn't work, they're still having PTSD. I think that's the least likely person who's going to go and have a hankering to like abuse this substance.
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
so a lot of these, like from a physiological perspective, a lot of these psychoactive drugs being tested in these therapy sessions are not considered to be addictive, like heroin is, or like alcohol is. Would that be fair to
Right.
say?
It's actually, I mean, some of the substances they're using, their trials with both psilocybin and LSD on actually for smoking cessation and for alcohol dependency. So the substances themselves actually work to, and MDMA is sort of like this other category, like the receptors it works on. The classic psychedelic works on the serotonin 2A receptor or 2B receptor. I forget the specific one.
That's interesting. Just because I don't know all the chemicals you're talking about, you're saying like the chemical in shrooms through psychotherapy can ease an alcohol addiction. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. So it wouldn't like cure your DTs, delirium tremens. Like it's not like going to stop your like bodily craving specifically. I just mean like as you're withdrawing, it's not used in that effect. It's more on this like once again long-term ongoing 12-week alongside therapy where it's used to like I guess for smoking cessation or quitting drinking alcohol. I mean, the interesting thing about that is, the substances are actively rewriting kind of like your brain chemistry. So a really cool study just came out. Hold on. I just had a file somewhere. Well, so back to MDMA. So LSD, psilocybin, peyote or mescaline work on this serotonin 2A receptor. And with MDMA, I think it has a different, I'm not exactly sure all the pharmacology of how the substance works exactly. And the other thing about all these studies is that they're also using like kind of this opening and to be able to study psychedelics to look at the science of the mind and the parts of the brain. So there's a really cool study where they did brain imaging with, I don't know what you call them, human subjects who were, they took them in like a sober state. They took 2 brain scans and they took, I don't know how many, I think a few, after administering psilocybin and 2 separate occasions, obviously. Psilocybin, they had studies on that, and then with MDMA as well. And they're finding that serotonin 2A receptor has this effect of, I guess, increasing random interconnectivity in the brain and reducing like these known pathways. So there's a part of the brain, it's not a specific part of the brain, it's called the default mode network. And it's just recently been studied and they're trying to figure out what it is. They found higher activity when thinking about yourself, future projections, thinking about the past, or like reliving a story in your mind. And the default mode network is active.
It's interesting because the whole MDMA thing and like psychotherapy, like it actually does kind of make sense from what we talked about. When I think of like LSD and mushrooms and peyote, right? I always think of like there's a lot like TV shows and movies where the guy like has all these problems and then the guy gives him peyote in the jungle and he has a crazy trip and he ends up like realizing all of his problems. But I just like it's like I think about something like peyote that's like a crazy experience, right? That's you get really deep into your mind.
Yeah.
I mean, like how do they keep people from just losing track of the reality in that moment? I don't know if you know the answer to that, but
I don't, yeah, I mean, specific in the therapy model, I don't know. I think it's more of an integrative session, like after it's kind of coming to a close, right? So they come into the room, they have this intention set, right? You're going to psychotherapy for weeks before this, and you've been talking about your PTSD, this thing that's like debilitating your life. Like you can't hold down a job, you're being violent, you're drinking whatever it is, a handle of whiskey a night just to exist, just to like not have these emotions or these fears or these like hypervigilant states. Or I mean, we all know like the classic Vietnam vet flashback, right? It's been like Simpsons, Family Guy, like point your finger at some common social media thing. So these people are in there trying to cure this and fix their life, and they see it as hope. I mean, there's a lot of veterans who have gone through it and share the information, and there are enough people signing up now, there's like no room, there's a huge wait list. I mean, people are actively invested in this, right? So then if you're going into a psychedelic state or psychedelic space, you have this intent, and through, I mean, the way it works on the brain isn't very well known. It's interesting. There's a lot of talk of kind of the subconscious, or like opening the doors of perception. So the default mode network I was talking about, it does all these things related to ego and self-awareness and awareness of others' thoughts, like these higher level of thinking. But it's also considered like the physical side of the human ego, where, I mean, like all the little voices in your head and like swirling thoughts about yourself, self-critical thoughts, those are generally associated to the default mode network. And the activity that these substances have actually reduces the activity in the default mode network, which allows, I mean, that happens, I think, during REM state as well, during sleeping, during dreams. So if you look into Freudian analysis and the idea that like the subconscious holds so much and it's behind this veil, and you know, you go to therapy, you talk about your dreams, you can pull things out and start to kind of like work on what's behind the curtain. If you can take a psychedelic with this intention and have it be like a waking dream, and have like this backdoor to your psyche or your subconscious, and you're kind of able to untie these knots and pick the things apart and kind of work out these issues that have been kind of like crippling you for a long period.
So
that's the theory. I mean, it's, yeah.
So you mentioned the default mode network. I've heard that before. Just like in layman's terms, is that kind of just like considered to be like a more like in a sober state of mind, just like the mind's general resting homeostasis of like survival mode, just kind of like, you know, just completely a sober brain, so like that there's this connection of neurons in the brain that fire more often than others.
Yeah, I mean, it runs at a certain rate. It takes like 40% more energy than other parts of the brain.
Okay.
And what it actually does is it's interpreting messages between different regions of the brain. So it's kind of like the superhighway between different parts of the brain. It works as a filtering mechanism. So, like our brain's taken I think it's like 2 billion inputs a second or something on that. A huge amount, right? There's that much coming in. But then what actually hits your awareness is infinitesimally small percentage of that in order for you to function, go through the world, right? And it's like the childlike, the baby state. Like the little kid, like can't understand so much of the world, and it kind of brings you back. When their default mode network's not online, they've done studies with the neuronal pathways, and it's not fully formed. Even until age, I think, 25, 26, the activity in that is not fully formed. So, I lost my train of thought.
you were just talking about how there's like the superhighway and acts as a filter and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, without default mode network, it's almost like the psychedelic state, or a childlike state, or a state where you couldn't really function in the world. Like you would walk into traffic, you would kind of not have the normal awareness that we have of like self-preservation.
Right. So it's sort
and
of,
then all inputs from the world are like unfiltered.
okay, so it like disinhibits you from exploring what your senses, like what a lot of what your senses ignore.
Yeah, so like this thing blocks all this information that's coming in.
Yeah. So like
So
for instance, like if you're on your way to work and you see like a beautiful flower in Central Park or whatever, and you kind of like, oh, that's nice, and then you like keep moving on, like, so like that's a default mode network. Like you have a goal that you need to go accomplish right now. Whereas if there was more, like a psychedelic, whether it is working or it's a child, like you pay more attention to this like impulsive, like vibrant.
Yeah,
sense.
I mean, it's just like bright and all this information's coming in and you're not like taking that, filtering it, and having a decision. I mean, you probably wouldn't even see the flower in Central Park if you're on your way to work. Right? You just walk straight through. Maybe if it's like something new. And I mean, like for me, I've never lived anywhere where there's fireflies.
Yeah.
And I was walking through Central Park and there were fireflies. And that's something that was new and fresh and totally different to me. And I completely stopped and sat on a bench and watched them for 20 minutes, right? It's this new, fresh experience. But now that's like categorized and filtered away and I've seen it. So the next time I walk through and see all the fireflies, my brain isn't as interested, or it's just this like thing to kind of like take in, see it where it is, and pass on.
Right. So in essence, like anything could be quote unquote fireflies while you're on these substances.
Sure. I mean, think of when you were a kid, like little kids, you give them anything. What do? They take it. They stick it in their mouth. They like, they're completely absorbed by whatever this object is, right? And their default mode network's not online yet.
Yeah. Really cool.
Cool.
Anyway.
What do you think the? I mean, like, honestly, it's a lot of it. It sounds. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but it seems like it would be helpful. It's like it seems hard to argue against, right? And every time I think of something that seems hard to argue against, like I have to wonder, like what's the other side of this argument that I'm not seeing? Like what is it that people would say absolutely not? What's their reasoning behind it?
Because you hear stories of like amazing life-changing trips that people go on, and then you hear like horrible nightmares that people can't get out of, and it was like the worst 5 hours of their life.
Yeah, I mean, it's risky. It's dangerous. I don't think it's for everyone. I'm not like advocating, oh, you have a problem, go out, get some MDMA, and like you'll solve it. You're gonna be just fine. Yeah, I mean, it's risky. There's I just went to an event recently, and there's been a few of these cases. There's a podcast I listened to. This comedian Shane Moss just recently spent some time in a psychiatric hospital after taking DMT.
Oh wow!
Another psychedelic. He I mean, he's talked about it on a few podcasts, and that's how I know about it. But he painted himself with, it's like this tribal ritualistic paint that's axe. It's a MAO inhibitor, which MAO, monoamine oxidase, is a chemical in your body that breaks down various things, but it breaks down DMT specifically. So he had painted his entire body with this. And then DMT, which is the active, I guess, psychedelic component in ayahuasca, as well as you can extract it from various plants and barks and roots. He was painted in this stuff that doesn't allow your body to break that down, and then he smoked some of that. And it just, like... He's like part of making this documentary, and he landed himself in a psychiatric ward and was having like delusions of grandeur, thought he was like the messenger and the savior sent to fix the world, and also thought he could hack into the White House with his brain. I mean, he was having a full-blown psychotic episode. And there's another event I just went to here in the city. There's the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society. The guy who's kind of founded it, put it together, and keeps the thing running. He had a similar thing where he landed himself in a psych ward for a week. So there are a lot of risks. I'm not saying it's a good cure-all. I mean, you look at the 70s, there's a reason this crackdown happened, and some people say part of it was because there were these protests against the Vietnam War and this like huge culture shift happening and kind of scared a lot of people. So there was a crackdown on the substances. But you also had a lot of acid casualties. I'm sure you hear that, where people just cooked their brain and couldn't function as members of society anymore. So yeah, I mean, there's huge risks. I myself have had much younger, but I mean, MDMA itself, I kind of was into that party scene a little bit too much, and it took me years to, I mean, even I think, I don't know, the effects that can have on like a constant use basis abuse can be hugely detrimental. But I think the way they're doing the studies with the psychotherapy and with it being prescribed, and also with minimal doses, I mean, three doses separated by a few weeks apart.
Right.
And also like the avoidance of running into any contaminants. I mean, apparently New York City, it was a few years back, they got a whole bunch of street MDMA. They tested it and they found that 9 out of 10 of what they bought had 0% MDMA in it. It's just some other drug, who knows, dirty. Yeah. Yeah. So it's definitely, I mean, there's some risks involved. The treatment itself.
I always found that to be one of the best arguments for the legalization of any drug. It's like, these people are going to do it anyway. Why not give them the cleanest version?
Sure, it's like all the moonshiners blinding half of America during Prohibition. But yeah, definitely. What do you, I mean, before we sat down today, and I guess I sent you some stuff, what were you aware of on this topic, even, I guess, cannabis, which is kind of getting a little more traction just due to legalization?
I mean, really, before we sat down, when it comes to just like psychedelics in general, I had I mean, I've had bad experiences with it. Like when Michael described the different types of people, right? I was in the second camp. They just have these horrible things, and like I've always had this idea that like it could even cause, you know, traumatic experiences in itself, and it can like have like a mental scarring on you. So when you first told me that, you know, this is something that can help a lot of people, it was hard for me to get behind. But the reading about just because I'm also very familiar with the psychotherapy and how powerful of an effect that can have on people when it comes to depression, anxiety, you know, people with like hypochondria and bipolarism and stuff. It's like psychotherapy can really, really help people. But it's so hard for people to go through psychotherapy. Like, in other words, someone who has a debilitating anxiety, someone who like has a anxiety so bad that it's paralyzing to their everyday function, like psychotherapy can solve that forever. And, you know, it's better than taking Xanax every day. So, but the thing is, people will not go through the psychotherapy because how hard it is, how painful certain emotions are for them, and they'd rather just deal with the anxiety the rest of their life. Like, and learning about that was amazing to me, because it's like no, just do it, just go through those painful emotions for just a little bit, and then you don't have to deal with this terrible anxiety anymore. But people won't do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
And so get Nike. You're gonna pull Nike in on the mental health crusade.
Maybe they can start funding some research.
So yeah, like Maps will say just do it if you give them $5 million.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that when you sent me those articles, that was the main thing that stuck out for me was I was like, oh, I can see how something like MDMA can get people through, give them the courage to go through some of the psychotherapy, which they never would have done otherwise.
True. Yeah. I mean, imagining, obviously I haven't done this, but I imagine these people with PTSD who are like have physical reactions, like their body has an actual reaction to even thinking of these memories of whatever it is, war, torn countries, or their whatever situation is. They cannot draw those memories up, right? They like squint their eyes and block it out and like shut that down because they're having such an intense reaction to it, right? And then you have a few sessions of psychotherapy, like I'm imagining like pretty light, non-invasive, and then you kind of like build the runway for this person to dive into those memories and pick them apart for those sessions with MDMA, and then they can just I'm sure they're tentatively like thinking about these things and not running into the same physical reaction to it.
Yeah, I think my problem is that like on paper all of this makes sense and sounds good, but when you get into like the what we talked about, the riskiness of it and starting to measure like the risk versus the reward and the politics of it and then implementing certain policies and all that, that's where I just like have no idea what I think yet,
Yeah, I mean, it's a slow rolling movement. A lot of these people who are doing the research now are advocating for rescheduling. Some of them I think are like ultimately hoping for decriminalization. I don't know what that number is or what that looks like, but I mean, even they're not talking about it because they're taking it as such a slow move, and they're doing it that way to not create shock and alarm, to not scare people, also not to like push it widespread and create this situation where you have a whole bunch of casualties from these substances being on the market.
Well,
they're taking baby steps in order to ensure the safety.
That makes sense. I think that's a good spot to pivot into your article that you wrote, because you kind of touched on some of the politics around some of this stuff, right? You want to give us a synopsis on that?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, one big thing for me, and it's actually a piece that I've been thinking about for a while, and I have an interview that I did with this guy. His name's Paul Austin. He started a company, whatever it is. They're an awareness, raising awareness about microdosing. So like within the whole psychedelic movement, there's a lot of people who, all right, so first of all, microdosing is the idea of taking sub-perceptual doses of a psychedelic. The two main ones right now are LSD and psilocybin, or mushrooms. So you take a really small dose, you have no perceptual effects, so you're not seeing fractals, you're not having any physical sensation, your vision's totally the same, you're not hearing anything different, bodily sensations are all the same, but it's still having this minor effect on your brain. This goes back to the default mode network, where it's kind of just a little bit reducing this rigid structure in your brain and allowing you to have more creative thoughts, not kind of like that childlike wonder, just on this tiny scale where you're not so distractible. You can focus a lot more because whatever it is you're interested in, like your brain is having this like new, fresh reaction to the code you're working on or the story you're writing. I mean, the article you're working on or whatever this thing is. I mean, they've also, there's a few studies, really preliminary and self-elected, on the topic. So anyway, within like the social world of psychedelics, you have this movement for medicalization in order to like slowly push the needle on legalization by providing a a successful, reliable treatment method that can actually help people. Then you have this other side that seems a little bit to be like trailblazing through bringing psychedelics to the masses through this microdosing that really appeals to a lot of people because, one, I mean, Silicon Valley, quote unquote, was built on microdosing, and two, like a lot of the reported benefits are pretty high. It's almost like Ritalin without the crash, I guess, is kind of how it's described, where you focus really intensely and have new creative ideas. So even better, it's not just focus. It also like creates new neuronal connections that weren't there previously. So these are like this split where you have, I wouldn't even call it a split, and they're trying, these two sides of talk to a bunch of people about kind of this, what I thought was a split, and really they're trying to like reconnect the two sides and kind of have a unified front. Anyway, so the article I wrote is not even on this topic. I wrote it on race and psychedelics, which is another facet, right? Because you have, so that's like the general landscape, right? You have research-oriented, you have the underground movement, and whatever, people taking them recreationally, either on their own with friends in cabins in the woods, camping, or at Burning Man or music festivals. And then you have this new thing emerging, which is the microdosing. And within all three of those, and that's kind of what the article was on, it's this white male majority throughout, like across the whole board.
White male majority participating in the therapy?
So, I mean, I believe participating in the therapy, for sure, conducting the therapy, conducting the research, part of the nonprofit organizations that are funding it. I mean, Burning Man's, I think, heavily white. A lot of these music, I mean, look at Coachella, like look at a lot of these events, it seems to be a majority white space, and especially in the research world, it's pretty male dominated. And that's something that I think is, especially for something that has the potential to really heal PTSD and stressful, traumatic events. I don't know. There's a lot of minority groups that could benefit much more heavily from it. Maybe not more heavily, but equally, and there should be equal representation.
Yeah, so I like when we wanted to cover this topic of psychedelics, I was really excited because it was like just from some of the stuff that's coming out, like that you referenced recently. Mm-hmm. It's just like an interest of mine, just because like you in the beginning you mentioned kind of your distaste for pharmaceutical companies and things like that, and like the profit seeking side of whatever it is that the medical community is after. And like Tommy and I, like sort of the main impetus for us starting this podcast was to like talk about all kinds of stuff, including like weird stuff like this. But like our main impetus was like kind of a political one, where we it was like kind of like a rallying against identity politics and like this like leftist majority of like a dominant voice in the media. So like when you sent me the article, I was like, okay, so really interested in psychedelics, but also like this like side of like this like white male devil type of like, don't disinclude minorities from psychedelics. And like my honest reaction was like minorities not getting psychedelics, like that is the most bizarre like the most bizarre cause to want to battle. Like there's so many things.
That's so funny.
So like, I mean like why that battle? Like why that hill to fight a battle? And I don't get it.
I mean, I don't think I'm like the champion of this movement. I mean, for one, I'm a white male. I I don't want to say I fell into this article specifically. I had wanted to go to this conference, and for kind of like for personal reasons, I wanted to go see what was going on, and I figured I'm also trying to write and get published, so why don't marry the two, right? So I worked this thing where I was able to write an article and get a press pass and go for free and for my own benefit on multiple levels, and also because I'm interested and I'm happy to, write for free for this group if they can kind of like, throw me the pass. And if you check out the article, there's actually a link in it to a talk by Nick Powers, and that's who I interviewed for the piece. And he was the only Black speaker at the event. And his talk was actually on, I think his talk was called Black Masks, Rainbow Bodies. Mm-hmm. And so he was originally like this voice that I piggybacked on to write the article. And I actually brought in excuse me, some ideas of epigenetics and transgenerational trauma, which he touched on. So I guess for me, it was like a blending of multiple interests that I have. I mean, I'm not this champion who's trying to, it was actually had, so as I wrote this one article on the whole conference, and I sent it to Symposia, and they were like, we don't really like this. So my soul was crushed. And they said, we like this one part. And that was the part where I had used the interview with Nick Powers, who gave the talk. So I went back to the drawing board, and on their website, they have this whole movement on that. So Symposia definitely is kind of championing that movement.
Okay.
And I
that
just
makes more
piggybacked
sense.
on that space to write an article and get published with them.
That makes a lot more sense, because to me, it's like the psychedelic movement is sort of about like that. Of course, it's like got the medical side, but like the recreational and the cultural side is like this sort of ego death, where like you are all accepting of everything in the universe as one, and like you recognize all living beings as
right.
like valuable and everything. And so like this like idea of like white males are dominating this, like the minorities are being pushed out of the psychedelic movement. Like it didn't really make sense to me, because like it's like it seems to be like if everyone was on shrooms, there like it would be like the most uniting, beautiful experience ever.
Right. Well,
and like and it's also like a loss of ego, and like a loss of these like superficial things like race or like whatever. Like I can understand like an economic argument for it for like a lower class, but like a race thing, it does
right.
That didn't make sense to me. But you telling me that like that's what the editors like, that makes a lot more sense.
Okay. Well, there's so many things I want to like talk to in what you just said. One, so I mean, I've heard you guys talk on this whole idea of free will existing, not existing, but on this, what's the model where we have no free will?
Determinism.
Yeah.
Determinism. Yeah. And this idea that you are not an individual. You are part of this like cosmic chain reaction that is being created. Your sense of self is an illusion. And then this idea of the default mode network, which is kind of this physical ego. And when you take psychedelics, it reduces activity in your default mode network, and you do have that sense of oneness and unitedness, and we're all the same thing, or there's no I, there's whatever. We're all part of the Godhead, I guess. Right. As much as I hate to use religious terms, with too much dead weight on them, but it's an interesting crossover between the two. And then I just wanted to say that it's not like the psychedelic movement is like forcing any minority out of it. It's just that I don't know if it's them having less of an interest. I mean, in the article I point out that even within psychology, there's less of a minority representation based on their population. Is that because economics or ability to go to higher education? There's a lot of factors that are involved before you even talk about psychedelics to be in this kind of like research space.
Yeah, right. I'm like, yeah, I mean, there's like so many things I want to say, but I'm trying to figure out like where to toe this line. I don't know, Tommy, did you have anything that you thought about?
I mean, we could honestly talk for another hour, 2 hours about this. It's funny because this is what I initially wanted you on, Aaron, after the first day we met. And I was like, this we gotta do this under a platform, and talk about this. But we could also get really into it on another time, I think. Yeah, I don't know. It's I'm glad that we kind of thought that this was like something you were ready to die for, was minorities not getting the chance to use psychedelics. So I'm glad that's not the case.
Yeah, because
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I think it's important. It's important to bring up. I don't know. I feel like I poked a few holes in kind of things that maybe weren't being paid attention to or looked at. But
yeah,
would you be? I mean, I guess I just ask you right now too. Would you be interested in like coming back on and talking strictly about this, like identity politics and maybe
sure.
dabbling in free will and stuff too? Cool.
That'd be fun. I mean, yeah, no qualms. I don't know. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because this is, I think it's a good, because like Tommy's right, like this rabbit hole is like, it has nothing to do with psychedelics, and I think I've really enjoyed our conversation of like delving into psychedelics, because I think it's really, really interesting. It's kind of like a frontier that was like ignored, and then people got back on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, me too. Aaron, it's been a really, really fun conversation. Like, I'll tell you, when we talked offline, you first said, this is what I want to talk about. I was like, oh, fuck no. I'm not for legalization of any type of psychedelics. And then I read more about it, and then halfway through this conversation, I was like, actually, I kind of like this idea. So you've changed my perception when it comes to a lot of this stuff. I'm still obviously very skeptical on some of it, but it's my nature.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's cool.
Where can everybody find this article that you wrote? So
Symposia is who published it. So www.symposia, that's with a P. So it's PSYMPOSIA.com.
Like psi, like it's spelled like.
Oh, yeah, like psychedelic.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, Psychedelic Symposium. And it's, I forget exactly where. I could pull up if I send you can you post the link on your little bio? Or, I mean, I guess people go to the site. You can either search my name on the site.
Yeah.
Or search whitewashing psychedelics, and it should come up.
Cool.
Did you come up with that title?
I did. Yes.
Nice.
And then, Aaron, really quick, I wanted to ask you, just because, I think this is a good place to kind of wrap up, because I think that our conversation was perfect for kind of like this whole like intro to whatever the psychedelic movement is, and like Tommy and I have just been talking about, like, we could talk for 10 hours about like the politics behind that article or whatever it is, but I'm just interested in terms of like your continuation as a writer, your continuation as like someone who wants to be in the publishing industry. Like what do you love to write about? Like, what is your passion? Where do you see yourself going in that direction? Because I'd be interested in following what you do and being I think like Tommy and I were just saying, like, it'd be great to have you back in a little while, and so I wanted to ask you that because we love covering all kinds of topics. So how do you see yourself as a writer?
Sure. I mean, I like frontier, new kind of like futurist. So like psychedelic movement, like you said, it seems like a frontier, right? Where this research is coming back. It's kind of where my interest in it was drawn. And then other areas similarly, I would love to do something on that. I mean, I've kind of, I've been working on a couple other pieces, but epigenetics, which I involved in my article a little bit, and the science of that, as it's a brand new field, and as we're understanding, like with CRISPR and how DNA works or how we can alter it. So, I mean, or not, is it CRISPR?
Oh yeah, I think I heard about that. The genetic engineering.
Yeah, I mean, we're on the frontier of being able to, whatever, choose your, I mean, starting off with probably eliminating diseases, heart disease, whatever, diabetes, and then moving on to, right, can we make a superhuman, or can you make your child smarter or yourself smarter?
Right.
Can we see in with 17 rods and cones, can we see the UV and, you know, ultraviolet and infrared spectrums? I mean, like, Tesla himself is a fun topic, Mars, electric cars. I mean, just any kind of like frontier. I read another piece on IoT as kind of like this burgeoning new field.
Internet of Things?
Yeah, Internet of Things.
Yeah.
What is that?
Internet of Things, it's the idea of interconnected devices. So, I mean, kind of like one joke item that was sold was a juicer called Juicero that the bags came pre-filled with fruit that you couldn't maybe you could open. I don't know the full story, but essentially when you ran out of fruit, it would order you more fruit and that would come to your door, right? This thing that's connected to your Wi-Fi that when you ran out of fruit for your juicer, it'd order you some more.
Okay.
So that's one tiny thing, but it's like your Apple TV and your Alexa and your thermostat, and it's just like everything being interconnected devices.
And like I think Amazon does Amazon Pantry or Amazon Fresh, where they deliver your same groceries every month or something like that.
Sure, but it'd be like an interconnected where like this was like the place you put your cereal box, and then like as soon as that cereal box wasn't there, a new cereal box.
It's the next level of Amazon Pantry.
Right.
Like the fridge can sense that you're low on milk, so it sends the thing to the grocery store.
That's real. They're selling fridges that do that right now.
Yeah.
Instead, it'll update an app on your phone that tells you your grocery list.
Wow.
So anyway, the piece I wrote was on retail spaces, using Internet of Things. Kind of like you go into a dressing room and it's like a virtual space where you can like change the color of the shirt or like try things on in a virtual mirror.
Cool.
Yeah. So you kind of see yourself as like as kind of like a tech / business / science like communicator, like middle, like.
Right. Blogging, freelance stuff is kind of where I'm at with that. I mean, who knows? I was going to be a doctor 3 years ago, so I guess 5 years ago. Take it back. It's been a little while.
Wow. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, cool.
But yeah.
Yeah. Well,
cool.
Awesome. Yeah. I think we'd love to have you back at a later time.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Aaron.
Yeah. So if you've got we got some interesting things coming up that you'll write about, and then if you ever jump into politics again, you've got a couple of adversaries ready to rock.
All right. Sounds good, guys.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Bye.
Yep.